Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Another Saturday morning and another monster recruiting weekend for us Michigan fans. And this one might be the most fascinating recruiting weekend of the whole spring. As five-star quarterback Ryder Lyons makes his way to campus. Now, this has been a fascinating recruitment to follow where Michigan and Chip Lindsey, they offer Ryder Lyons in January. And we saw that offer go out. And I think a lot of Michigan fans said, all right, cool, we offered him. I don't really expect Michigan to be a player in this recruitment. And over the last couple of weeks and months, Michigan has kind of emerged as a legit contender in this one. And I feel like this weekend, we're going to get a really good feel for how bad Michigan wants Ryder Lyons and really what are the chances that Michigan can go out and get a guy like Ryder Lyons. I've been very vocal that the quarterback dominoes are starting to fall and they're starting to fall in a way where I think Michigan, they're going to have an opportunity here. Early on in this recruitment, it was Oregon and USC. Well, Oregon might land five-star quarterback Jared Curtis. USC just took the commitment of Jonas Williams. Then you look at Ole Miss as another contender. They seem to be trending for a guy like Landon Duckworth. I think Michigan and BYU are the two programs that, might want Ryder Lyons the most out of the contenders in this 2026 cycle. Now, when you talk Ryder Lyons, there are a lot of Michigan fans that feel different ways about it, right? Because you look at Ryder Lyons, an undeniable talent at the quarterback position, is going to take a mission trip after he graduates high school and is essentially going to be a 2027 recruit. To me, I know that maybe concerns some Michigan fans where you might be investing a lot of money into a really talented quarterback that's going to take a year off of football after his high school career. And I get that could be a concern. I look at it and say it almost could be a benefit for Michigan, especially in this type of recruitment where Ryder Lyons wants to play early. And essentially with that mission trip, essentially with him being a 2027 guy, he's going to be a freshman as Bryce Underwood's going into year three. The quarterback runway makes a lot of sense where you bring in Ryder Lyons. You have him sit behind Bryce Underwood for a year as Bryce Underwood finishes his career at Michigan. And then you have Ryder Lyons ready to go and take over this offense after Bryce Underwood leaves. And Ryder Lyons is only going into year two. From a quarterback runway standpoint, I think this was kind of the plan for Michigan. You land Bryce Underwood in 2025, it's going to be hard to recruit a quarterback right after him in 2026. And I think Michigan's plan all along was to really push their chips in for a 2027 guy. Ryder Lyons is essentially that. This one continues to be one that I know Michigan is not the face of this recruitment right now. To me, just reading tea leaves, and y'all know I ain't no insider, it does seem like Michigan could have a much larger chance than I think a lot of people appreciate. And as a Michigan fan, it excites me. Look, when's the last time Michigan has stacked two five-star quarterbacks back-to-back? And you have Bryce Underwood for the next couple of years. You have the potential to have Ryder Lyons take over the offense once Bryce Underwood goes to the NFL draft. Michigan's never stacked two five-star quarterbacks on top of each other, at least in my recent memory. This is an opportunity for Michigan to do that and really kind of change the perspective of how people view this Michigan offense. Going to be really exciting. It's going to be exciting to see how Chip Lindsey wants to manage the future of this quarterback room. But I will say this, as much as it's crazy to start talking about life after Bryce Underwood, Michigan did not do a very good job with this when they had JJ. They had JJ. JJ balled off for Michigan, won a national championship. But after JJ left, we kind of saw what the quarterback room looked like. Michigan didn't really seem to plan for what it's going to look like after JJ. If you want to sustain dominance, you kind of have to plan for what your quarterback room is going to look like 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And I think Ryder Lyons could be that answer. Now, I want to get a little bit more into Ryder Lyons, talk about another quarterback that Michigan's going after, and I also want to talk about some other names that will be on campus. I mean, there's a significant change in terms of how Michigan's going about their business on the recruiting trail where, under Jim the last couple of years, it was a really small board of targets Michigan wanted. They go out and get those targets, but they wouldn't really participate in some of these bigger names. That is not how Sherrone Moore's operating. For lack of better terms, Sherrone Moore is not backing down at a single recruitment in the 2026 class. If they want a guy, don't matter where they are, Michigan's going to take a run at him. That's kind of what we're seeing as Sherrone Moore's taken over this program, which I think excites a lot of Michigan fans. I think we sit here and look at Michigan and say, Obviously, one of the better educational opportunities you see across college football. It's one of the biggest brands in college football. Has had a ton of development or a ton of success, not only winning on the football field, but developing guys into the NFL. Why not Michigan as a powerhouse on the recruiting trail? And it seems like Sherrone Moore wants to get Michigan to that point where, Michigan had a lot of success under Jim, but never really was a powerhouse on the recruiting trail. I think Sherrone Moore wants to get Michigan to that level. And I think as us all Michigan fans agree, like, we're checking all the boxes. Why can't Michigan become that premier recruiting program across the country? Excited to get into it. Before we do, and as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. We've had a lot going on over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the primary discussions we've had is around Bryce Underwood, Michigan spring practice. There's a lot of stuff going on the recruiting trail as well. The amount of support the Michigan fans have shown the boys has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And now you start with Ryder Lyons, and let's just talk about the player. I think this is a really unique talent who gives you that playmaking ability at the quarterback spot that it just seemed like Michigan really lacked in 2024. When things are not going perfect and you have to get outside the pocket and throw off platform and be creative. Something J.J. McCarthy was exceptional at doing, really struggled in 2024 with a guy like Davis Warren. Ryder Lyons gives you that on top of elite arm talent. There's not a throw that Ryder Lyons can't make. And again, I think the quarterback runway makes a lot of sense. Ryder Lyons has been vocal that he wants to be a guy that plays early at whatever college he goes to. Now, him being a mission trip guy kind of makes it a little bit difficult for him at times. I think Michigan presents an opportunity where you come into this program as a 2027 guy. You're a freshman as Bryce Underwood's going into year 3. You sit 1 year behind Bryce Underwood. I've been pretty vocal that I think Bryce Underwood's going to be a guy that goes 3 years and he goes to the NFL. And Ryder Lyons is ready to take over after Bryce Underwood leaves. I think this makes so much sense for Michigan for a lot of different reasons. And then you look at the other programs that are involved with Ryder Lyons and say, it seems like the quarterback dominoes are falling where, I wouldn't say Ryder Lyons is going to fall into your lap, but it really presents an opportunity that, hey, if you really like this kid, you can push your chips in and go get him. And we often don't talk about that when you're talking about a 5-star quarterback from the state of California. I think it's going to be really interesting to monitor, and I think this would make a lot of sense for Michigan in terms of how they want to manage this quarterback room. Now, another name to monitor for Michigan in the 2026 cycle is Nathan Bernhard from the state of Ohio. I'll just start with this. I love when Michigan goes out and grabs guys from the state of Ohio that Ohio State passed up. Essentially, J.J. McCarthy was kind of that guy. Ryan Day told him that you're our guy, and then they took the commitment to Kyle McCord, kind of spited J.J. McCarthy a little bit. He comes to Michigan and put belt to butt to Ohio State for the last couple of years. I like that kind of dynamic. Now, Nathan Bernhard, there's a lot of intriguing qualities about him. He's a big body, kind of reminds you a little bit of like Ben Roethlisberger. He's just this big, imposing quarterback that's really hard to bring down, has a big arm. There are, probably some inconsistencies in his game that make him a 3-star prospect, but a guy that you can kind of throw into this quarterback room, and he's probably not going to start over Bryce Underwood for the next couple of years, maybe not even over Ryder Lyons, but a guy that, one, adds some depth and adds some upside to the room, a guy that, might not necessarily pan out, but certainly could. And I think if you're Michigan, it's going to be hard to land a top prospect in 2026, and it doesn't seem like Michigan's going after a guy, outside of Ryder Lyons. You add him to the room and kind of see what it looks like over the next couple of years. But there are some intriguing aspects to Nathan Bernhard's game, and I think the most intriguing is he was a lifelong Ohio State fan. Ohio State passing him up, in-state kid, comes to Michigan, kind of that villain arc, you might say, which I think intrigues a lot of Michigan fans. Now, getting to some other names that will be on campus this weekend, I want to start with Anthony Jones. This dude, I did some work on him this morning, sitting down with my cup of coffee. There's a ton to like with this kid. 6'3.5", 240, state champ shot put thrower as a freshman in the state of Alabama. You see that on the football field. Now, when you look at the athletic profile, a little bit short of 240, you say, all right, twitchy guy, wins around the corner. That is what he does. There's a lot of twitch. There's a lot of bend and flexibility. He is a burst and bend kind of guy. But then you continue to work through the film and say you start to see the shot put numbers as a football player because the hands are powerful. The hands are devastating. He has the ability to win not only with burst and bend, but with speed to power right through tackles as well. When you check both of those boxes, you're such a difficult edge rusher to deal with, and he's a hammer against the run. I would like Michigan to lean into this. Look at the development that you've seen from Michigan in the edge room. I mean, you send Josiah Stewart off to the NFL draft, not to mention, guys like Aiden Hutchinson or Braden McGregor, Jalen Harrell in the past. Derek Moore and TJ Guy will be going to the NFL after this year. You're hearing some really good things about Don Nichols and Cam Brand. Michigan is developing edge rushers just about as good as any program in the country. You want to use that on the recruiting trail. And a guy like Anthony Jones, NFL dude written all over him, and I think more importantly, early impact kind of guy. This one would make a ton of sense, and I think it's going to be a hard pull from the state of Alabama, but I think, again, this is the example of Michigan not really backing down to anybody on the recruiting trail. If we like a kid, like we like Anthony Jones, we are not afraid to go down to the state of Alabama and fight Auburn and fight Georgia and fight Alabama for one of the best prospects in that southeastern region. Another name, another Alabama kid, Shadarius Tootle, who's currently committed to Auburn, but he has made trips to Michigan, going to be back on campus this weekend, going to be back on campus for an official visit in the early summer months. Michigan's made some inroads on him. And Shadarius Tootle kind of, the frame reminds me of Jayshon Barham coming out. He's probably not as physically imposing. Like Jayshon Barham was a freaking bad man coming from the state of Maryland out of high school. Shadarius Tootle probably needs to develop a little bit more, put a little bit more weight on his frame and add a little bit more physicality to his game. But this is kind of the change that we've seen from Michigan in terms of what kind of linebackers we want to go after. We want to go after long, juiced-up linebackers that can cover ground. As much as I like the guys like Mikey Barrett or a guy like Josh Ross, when we played teams like Ohio State, and then you factor in teams like Oregon and USC out there on the West Coast in the Big Ten, you need linebackers that can fly around the football field and operate in space. Shadarius Tootle is one of those guys. You've seen a significant change in the type of athletic profile that Michigan is valuing at the off-ball linebacker spot. We needed to get faster. I think we have gotten a lot faster, and I think that has really led to the success that Michigan has had against teams like Ohio State the last couple of years. Another very similar name is Nick Abrams from Maryland, and now you would expect Biff Poggi to, maybe play a role in this one. You bring in Biff Poggi for a lot of different reasons, but recruiting the DMV might be the top reason. Nick Abrams, another similar guy, 6'2", 215, long, covers a lot of ground. Another kind of linebacker that Michigan wants to add. And then the last one is Davian Brown. Davian Brown, and this is, again, you see the shift in terms of what type of bodies Michigan wants to bring in. We want to get bigger and faster at the pass catcher position. Well, Davian Brown's that guy from Richmond, Virginia. What fascinates me about Davian Brown is he plays a lot of slot. As a big slot wide receiver that has some good short area quicks that can work vertically down the field. He's a multidimensional guy, which I think is really important when you're talking about wide receivers coming out of high school. So often you see wide receivers that are kind of one-trick ponies. And normally it's just like track times. A guy that's really, really fast, 10.6 in the 100-meter dash, but outside of just running really fast in a straight line, there's not a ton there. Davian Brown, he's a fast wide receiver, but has a diverse route tree, works the middle of the field well, knows how to separate in the short intermediate route tree. Another guy that checks a lot of boxes that, again, fits the athletic profile that Michigan is trying to bring in to this wide receiver room. I'm excited. And we've talked about this the last couple of weeks. At Michigan on the recruiting trail, momentum looks different. For right now, it's the momentum is there are a lot of guys from across the country that are making their way up to Ann Arbor. The board is really big. Michigan has a lot of irons in the fire, you might say. And I don't know if I got that analogy right, but we're casting a lot of lines. As opposed to, 5 years ago, it would be a really small board. We'd kind of find our guys we want to go after them, but we wouldn't maybe waste time going down in the state of Texas or going out to the state of California and getting into some recruiting battles. Sherrone Moore and this Michigan program and how they're operating now, they're not really backing down. And if they like a guy, they're going to go fight. And that might mean, hey, commitments might not be as early in the cycle. You go back to how Michigan closed the 2025 class, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting, where we're going to be in it for a lot of guys. They might commit to a different school in the spring or summer. We'll come back and check in when it's time to sign the paperwork in late December. That's where it seems like Michigan's kind of trying to do it right now. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. We'll continue to break down some talent that's coming to Michigan. We got the spring game coming up next week, and I think we're going to watch that live with all of y'all, which is going to be really fun. We don't really do that much. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.